Welcome to Discover the Wonder, the show where we talk to creators, thinkers, and seekers about the moments that made them stop, stare, and feel something big. Today we are joined by someone who's made a life out of asking the big questions. He's a journalist, a storyteller, an educator who spent years behind the scenes with the most fascinating minds in the world, and yet his own story is just as rich. Welcome, Stephen Galloway.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being on the program. Stephen, take us back a little bit about as a fellow European, about your upbringing. And you went to Cambridge, and to give us a sense of how you perhaps came into the sense of wonder.
Yeah, I did. I grew up just outside London, and my mother is actually a Holocaust survivor. And so that played a role in our upbringing. You know, not something you are necessarily consciously aware of, but you are aware of injustice. You're aware of persecution. You're aware of what it is when people have nothing. And that would come back to me much later, because when you're young, you're very driven by your own ambition and achievement. And then later, it's interesting how that sort of fades, and you start thinking, how can I help others achieve those things? And particularly the ones who don't have anything. So I grew up outside London, went to Cambridge. Like you, I studied English, which I loved. But I always had my eye on America. I loved film, was in love with film, would watch easily 7 films a week. You know, back then the Radio Times, which was like our TV guide, would list what was playing, and my entire schedule was based on this. And I remember once getting very close to making it with a girl and giving up the Spider Stratagem by Bertolucci, and I thought, oh my God, I betrayed my art, you know. But I was 14 at the time. So I loved Cambridge, and when I left, I really wanted to come to America, but I didn't have a rich family, and there were 2 scholarships, and so I applied for them, and I was very lucky I got one. And I came here, went to film school, and that was sort of a transformational moment for me, because I wasn't happy there, and I wasn't very good. And I dropped out after 1 semester. And I'm not going to name the film school because I don't want to diss one of our competitors that's a very, very good film school. But I left, and luckily I met a director named Martin Ritt who did Norma Ray, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold Hard. He's an extraordinary human being as well as director. He'd been blacklisted for many years. And he took me on as, I guess, what we today would call an intern. But I just hung out with him for a year and went on set with him. And the scholarship I'd won said, you do what you want if it's educational. And so these forces have all stuck with me. The misery of film school, which has completely affected how I want to run this film school. This man who had given up years of his life and income because of a principle that he believed in, that he would not name names. And then my mother's family and her awareness of persecution and prejudice. And those, especially now in this later part of my life, really shape everything I think about. Well, I think about petty things too, but the better angels, you know.
Incredible. So to me, a sense of wonder means that you always maintain a sense of curiosity and a sense of mystery. I think it's important to have those things in life. Did you notice, coming from the UK, did you notice at some point in your journey in America that you were losing those 2 things?
No, never.
Never.
I've never lost either one, I'm very glad to say. In some ways they become more narrow, in others they become larger. So curiosity, you know, I spent decades as a journalist. Journalists are nothing if not curious. But when I was younger, I was curious about a few things. I'm not necessarily as curious as I was about those things. Fiction, I loved fiction. Now I hardly read it. And I think, oh my gosh, I so loved Dickens and Chaucer and Shakespeare. When do I read that? But I'm curious about other things that I didn't know then or didn't care about. Science, the environmental world, what's going on outside this planet, and always human psychology, which is endlessly fascinating. And when I write, because I write books mainly about Hollywood, I'm much more interested in the people and what drives them than I am actually in the films themselves. So I think I'm completely curious, for good or bad. You know, you can be too curious, then you have to hold yourself back and not seem like you're nosy or probing. Mystery is all around us, and we never come to the end of it. And when I was a child, we lived in a little village outside a little town outside London, and I'd keep my window without the curtain and look out onto the fields, and above you see the stars, which we don't see in the city. You know, a sky full of millions and billions and trillions of stars, and you'd wonder what they were, and you'd wrestle with the concept of eternity. And what is eternity? You can't hold in your mind. And how far do things go? And recently I've been thinking, well, if infinity, extends endlessly out, it must also extend endlessly in. And the tiniest imaginable thing must become tinier and tinier and tinier and tinier. And so we both have a compulsion to understand what goes out and what goes in. And I'm very, very fascinated by that, knowing the mystery will keep receding and receding the closer I get. And I'm okay with that. Keats said, a poet, which I'm not, wish I had that gift, must live in uncertainty, mystery, and doubt. And I didn't understand that as a teenager, but I do now.
Speaking of human psychology, you sat with some of the biggest celebrities in cinema. Looking back at your conversations with them, is there something that you found in that, I don't want to say people have in common, but was there a parallel that you identified that drove them to start?
Yes, and this hit me one moment. The drive for worldly success is directly, almost mathematically equal to some emptiness inside. That fire that propels us, I don't mean propels us to do art or write, but maybe that too, but certainly to achieve something in the eyes of the world. The bigger the drive, the more the cavern inside. And I started to feel, interviewing a lot of people, that they were absolutely mathematically related, no matter how well those people hide it, because a lot of them have learned to put on a confident front, have learned to create a certain image. One of my friends who was a director once said, the greatest myth in Hollywood is that the camera never lies. It lies all the time. You know, and then people find out that this dignified, noble, brave actor is a cowardly, selfish, petty human being. So what we see is not the reality. And the reality is driven by this furnace that people have in the sun. Stars rarely become stars by accident. That you can walk away from that if you don't like, you know, the glare of the Klieg lights hitting you.
As Dean of Chapman University, you mentor a lot of young creatives. Is there something that is there one thing that you want to give forth to people? I'm sure everybody has their individual, you know, piece of advice they receive from you, but is there something, again, is there a parallel that you give to young creatives to keep the sense of wonder and never lose it?
Well, I think people can be very intimidated by failure, and then they judge themselves, and that blocks them. And what I've tried to say repeatedly is failure happens to all of us. We fail multiple times, over and over and over again, and hopefully we pick up and learn from it. And some of it's because of us, and some of it is just circumstances and luck. You know, each film that succeeds is a little miracle, because you have to get so many things right. The script, the acting, the editing, the music, the subject, any one of those can tip it off the edge. How does this bumblebee fly? But it does. And I think if you bear that in mind and keep focusing on the fact that trying should be a pleasure, and that not succeeding is okay. That's an important message, especially when you haven't had success. Because when you're young, especially if you come from a disadvantaged background, where failure is drummed into you, any failure can knock you off course. So that's really important. And then, of course, what we all know, which is the process itself is the magic. And I remember when I wrote my first book, I think, oh, there's going to be this wonderful book party, and everything is towards that end. And then the book party happens, and I realize, oh my gosh, it's hard work. I've got to introduce this person to that person, make sure this one's happy and that one's happy. And when the party you've hosted is over, oh, thank God. And then I realize, oh, the pleasure of writing, the pleasure of bathing in words is the magic for me. And how those things just pop into your head. And that is 98% of the experience, not the crowns and the baubles and the awards that you get at the end.
What advice would you give to young writers?
Get experience in life. The biggest mistake most make is, I want to be in the industry now, I want to get a job. I made that mistake too. But join the Peace Corps, go overseas, volunteer for charities, do all those things that are going to enrich you as a human being, because your real writing career is not going to begin until you're about 30. You must know relationships. You must know what people think. And the best way to do it is to experience living. I started off teaching a writing course at Santa Monica College. And I thought, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do with such a mix of students with backgrounds. The best ones were the ones who really came from difficult backgrounds. And what I said to them was, for an artist, everything you've suffered is food for your work. And if you can channel it, that's great, as opposed to let's just create another by-the-book formulaic thriller.
I have to ask you about AI and its connection to creative writing. Do you feel it is a threat to the profession of writing in general? I mean, especially screenwriters?
I don't. And by the way, I said here we're going to embrace AI. We're going to integrate it into every single curriculum, each major, no matter what. We organized 2 extensive workshops for all our faculty, and then we brought in experts to work with individual groups. So for instance, with our visual effects faculty, we brought in Rob Legato, who's a 3-time Oscar winner, who worked with them on how you use this as a tool. And I feel if you look at history, every new piece of technology has been threatening. You know, don't forget when sound came in, every studio except for Warner Brothers said this is the end, this is terrible, or it's just a fad. When television came in, that's the enemy. Oh, actually it creates a big market for our movies. When cable came in, nobody's going to pay for it. Streaming, which has increased the amount of production by a dozenfold, every new technology is threatening. This will be a tool. It will also upend many things. It'll remove many of the jobs in animation. It will create prototypes for writing and so on. But I think if creative people learn to harness this as a tool, it will be to their advantage. By the way, I was very optimistic about it, thinking it can't do anything creative. And then I gave a commencement speech last week, and one of my colleagues was dissing my commencement speech. And he put another version through ChatGPT and came up with this amazing, funny speech. And I said, it can do comedy? And that really shocked me. I didn't know that. So that will be around. But I think ultimately, people will get bored seeing these same things.
But isn't that part, just for me as an ignorant lay person, isn't that part of the intimidating factor that AI has this ability to, I don't want to say be self-conscious, but there is certainly some strange awareness. It's certainly not consciousness, I think, but there is an awareness to it. And if it evolves over the next 2 or 3 years, don't you think that that is a threat to create a writer's creative endeavor, meaning that the AI will be just as good as the human writing the story because it's evolved? Or do you not think?
Yeah.
Do you think it'll be always this soulless sort of false?
You know, until I saw my rewritten speech, which was actually so much better than my own, I would have said, no, it's always going to be soulless. Now I don't know. I would have thought this can only be a tool, it cannot be original. And now I don't know. But it is here to stay. And the students who learn to master it and use it will have jobs, will have careers. Just as when computers came in. You know, when I was a kid, no one had computers at home. And the people who knew how to use them had a distinct advantage and a distinct future in work. What it'll be, I don't know. And I hope that being optimistic is right, because it is possible that the end of the world is here, you know, that all creativity will disappear. I don't think so.
Understood. What is something that you have learned from the students that gives you a sense of wonder, is positive to you?
So, first of all, despite what everybody says in dismissing the younger generation, oh, they don't do this, they don't do that, we would dismiss the same way. They're unbelievably passionate and so hardworking and committed to what they do. At least not everybody, but most of these students. And it's awe-inspiring, the effort they put into their work to making magic when the passion comes alive. And the key thing is having the passion. And I once went to speak at a high school in South Central LA, and I talked about passion, and one boy said, "How do I find my passion?" Which has haunted me ever since, because actually, if you follow what interests you and go deeper and deeper, it becomes a passion, whether it's sports statistics or film or technology. But you have to follow something, going back to curiosity, that you're curious about. And then as you become more and more connected to that, it will become your passion. One of my friends who writes for The Hollywood Reporter, Scott Feinberg, when he was a teenager, decided he was really interested in the Oscars. So he decided he was going to watch all the Oscar-nominated movies. And little by little, he became an expert and obsessed with it. And now, you know, 20 years later, that's how he earns his living.
Right, that's the list, I remember.
Yes.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. So I'm actually amazed at their energy, enthusiasm, total immersion in what they do. It's not everybody, but it's a lot.
Nice.
And it's the opposite of what people say. And maybe it always is. Once you make these blanket generalizations of this generation is this, or worse than ours, it's rarely true, you know. If you look at the World War II generation where 19-year-olds were captain bomber planes, well, my generation was not that. Didn't mean we didn't also do good things. And I think that's true today. What's worrying to me is I'm talking about students who've had opportunity, who've gone to a terrific university, who are studying what they love. The expense of an education today, not just here but everywhere, is mind-boggling. And it's going to shut doors for hundreds of thousands of young people where they won't have that opportunity. And I'm really worried about that.
Is there a favorite piece of music that you go back to rediscover the sense of wonder, or to just find the serenity and peace, something that inspires you? Do you play an instrument? Sorry, these are compound questions.
No, it's my deep regret that I played a bamboo pipe when I was a kid, but I couldn't quite, you know, get a recorder. And I remember saying to my parents, "Will you get me a piano?" And it was so expensive. That we will if you really say you'll learn this. I'm very not musically gifted, but I love to listen to mainly classical music. I love opera. When I was driving down this morning, they had some of Chopin's etudes playing. And I remember first hearing Chopin when I was a teenager. and I was an actor, and I was acting in a miniseries about Chopin and his lover, Georges Sand, famous novelist. And they would play the music because the actor playing Chopin, Georges Chakiris, famous from West Side Story, would have to rehearse on this wooden piano, and the music would play. I thought, oh my God, that is the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my life. And then I lived in Paris in my 20s, and my girlfriend and I would go to the opera, and they would sell cheap tickets 2 weeks before, and you'd line up all night. And I remember seeing the night Pavarotti was going to come, and everyone's excited. We're with the fanatics, waiting, and word starts to spread something's gone wrong. And the show begins with Tosca, and somebody's on stage waiting. At the very moment Pavarotti's meant to come on, the curtain comes down. And clearly he'd thrown a tantrum off stage. And they began all over again. And there's a moment in the opera when he sits on this big wooden stool in shock to find out that, as he thinks, Tosca's betrayed him. And some stagehand had sawn the leg off that stool, and it collapsed underneath. He goes rolling across the stage, and Tosca and everyone else is trying to pick him up, So Tosca remains a favorite opera,
I see your dog has left us.
Yes, he's abandoned us. Yes, it's hard to find love even from a dog. So
how have you always had animals?
No. When we were kids, we briefly had a dog, and it was heartbreaking because when I was about 12, my brother and I were going to school. It was a long way off. My mother was working full time, so we had to give away the dog, and I was just devastated. And I never got a dog again. I had a couple of cats, and finally, about 8 years ago, I went to a shelter and found this dog they found in Mexico. He used to speak Spanish. And I immediately went through the worst moment in my life where I was in love with this dog. First of all, they didn't want to give it to me because he had another dog. Then they said, okay, come back. And I came back. I brought him. And the moment I brought him home, the worst commitment phobia hit me. And the shelter called and they say, hey, how's everything going? Terrible, terrible. I'm bringing him back now. And I got him in the car. I drove back. Halfway back, he looked so sad. Maybe not. And I drove back home. No, he has to go. And I start driving in circles. And then it was too late. Okay, the next day. And after 2 weeks, he's one of the great loves of my life,
And they bring us wonder.
Yes, every day. Yes, little things that they do. I'm always thinking, how do we communicate with a dog that doesn't speak? And yet there's a connection and an understanding. And he has a very deep soul and a kindness to him. And I was also thinking how bad manners that in a human being would be off-putting are weirdly endearing with a dog, He eats with his mouth open and litters things everywhere. And somehow I'm fascinated by that.
Oh, Stephen, thank you very much. This was incredible.
Oh, for me too.
The best
Thank
way
you.
we can end on
Yes.
is
that's
the
lovely.
dog. So thank you for joining us. If you like this content, please share and like us, and see you next time.